We have Satya here. Satya wants to cover inventory capacity utilization, some concepts around it, and then we'll offshoot into some examples in the supply chain and in the business world, and how critical are these things for thinking about from a profit point of view, how the businesses work, and the efficiencies which come into play.
Hey there, great to see you, man. So yeah, I think last week we spoke about like how the company navigates from demand planning to supply planning, and we also covered this sales and operations planning as a critical process for the companies to understand how for them to meet their business objectives, what each and every entity or verticals in the company has to do, right? And from that point of view, we covered, especially from operations and supply chain point of view, which was supply planning. Now, now, if you go one level below supply planning, I believe the critical aspect of supply planning is your inventory management. And what basically is today, what we'll try to cover is what basically is inventory management. What are the parameters that impacts your inventory planning, and how generally the companies, what is the strategies the company go with, the standard practices they go, while managing their inventories. Okay. So yeah, so like as I said, right, so supply planning, when the companies decide what is that they have to do. And generally the two key models, what the companies, any of the companies they follow, is BTO or BTF, which is basically build to order or make to order, what we call it as, or make to forecast or build to forecast, right? Now, build to order is very, I would say, not many people do it, but yeah, it depends on what kind of business you are into. And also part of the supply chain can follow build to order, or it can be followed for some products or some SKUs. But most of the products, if I see, generally most of the companies follow this build to forecast methodology. Now, why do they follow build to forecast and why not build to order? Like, so what happens is that it depends on the lead time of a product, right? Now, let's say if your lead time of a product is like 4 weeks or 5 weeks, so customer is not willing to wait for 4 to 5 weeks, right? So, and that's the reason this demand planning whole process comes into the place. So the companies, what they do is, and in a very competitive industry or any market, right, they try to lower the lead times, because, and that is what you can sell to the customer, right? Today, if I have to order anything on Amazon or something, it's not that I have to wait for a longer period of time, or I don't have to wait for the actual lead time of the product, which it takes to convert raw material to the finished good, right? It doesn't take so much of time. So basically, that's why, if you see most of the products, they follow this build to forecast uh, process or strategic methodology. And what happens is that when they say build to forecast, what companies do is they know that, okay, this is what I'm predicting, this is what I am predicting my demand to be. And what actually there is, they look into their lead time and they try to cover up the they try to build for the lead time demand. Let's say my lead time is for a SKU or for a product is 4 weeks. So I'll see, okay, what is my next 4 weeks demand? At least I'll try to cover 4 weeks of demand. Hey, this is what my 4 weeks demand is. Let me have that 4 weeks of supply now, so that any customer orders, they should be able to get it immediately. Now, how soon they should be able to get it, now it depends on the company strategy. What companies they look into, at least into their industries, they look into the minimum lead time all other their competitors are providing, and that is a benchmark they set, and that's what they follow. Like if generally, let's say the minimum lead time is like one week, for example, so most of the competitors or the companies within that industry, they'll try to see, okay, I can serve my customer within 1 week. He doesn't have to wait for like 3 weeks or 4 weeks, which could be your actual lead time to convert raw material to finished good, right? Now, so that's how the build, they basically build to forecast, try to based on the lead time, and that's how they place their inventory. Now, the next critical thing for inventory management, right? So inventory management is basically nothing like you try to serve your customer in a best possible way by placing your inventories in such a way, right, where you have this flexibility, because you know that demand keeps changing between product to product, right? So you have this mix, you have, or sometimes your demand can go down, it can go up, so you have all these variations, right? You'll always have forecast variations. Now here again, right, so where exactly we place the inventory, and how quickly we can react to the demand changes, right? That's what I would call it as inventory management. And that's where the strategies, the service levels comes into the place. And now when I said about the key parameters that comes into the place for inventory management is one of the critical thing is your service levels, right? What is a percentage of orders you want to meet on time, right? That is one thing. And that is a critical factor because service levels will define your buffers, right? The inventory buffers that you need to carry. Second thing is your lead time, right? The lead time, when I say if your product lead time is high, then that means you have to carry a lot of inventory. And that can, again, I would say, can shoot up your operating cost because the inventory has to be has to be sitting there until the demand comes up, or it or a forecast gets converted into actual demand and all those things. So demand, definitely demand. And the other thing is your demand rate, right? The rate at which you are getting demand and all this, how quickly you have to replenish your inventory and all those things. So these are 3-4 things that which play a very important role for inventory management. So, and coming back to uh, the
Let me
point I
add,
was.
Satya, let me add something on the BTO, build to order and build to
Mhm.
forecasting. Just to finish up the conversation, then we'll go to the inventory thing. So build to order, build to forecast, just to bring this to life a little more from a real life example point of view, right? Think about this. You're going to a grocery store somewhere, you're buying a product. Most of the time they're not building to order. It's like build to forecast. They're forecasting that I will have this many customers, they'll come in, they'll buy some noodles, and then you're just picking up your pack of noodles from the store. But let's say you're trying to buy a house, most of the time it's a build to order thing. And then and off late there are places like, especially you're getting apartments and some homes which are like cookie cutter, they might do like build to forecast and they try to sell later. But typically homes, you have a little bit of customization and then high dollar amounts involved in that. But there is a build to order kind of phenomena. So you have to think about it the same way in the business as well. Whether it could be like a B2B business or a B2C. I would say dollar amount versus customization, if you think about those two variables, will generally get you to the point of it's a build to order or a build to sort of a build to forecasting. And there is sometimes hybrid models too. For example, you're buying a car and there are different colors. They may do all build to forecast for all the parts, but the just the last colors and stuff may be more like build to order kind of thing, because once you get in the order, you'll have a lead time to do it. So just to add a little more flavor to what Satya was talking about.
Yes, in this typical example, as you can see, right, the higher the cost,
Yeah.
everyone would try to be more cautious, not to just keep that inventory sitting up and waiting for that order. So yes, definitely your cost also does add a significant, it's a significant parameter to come up with these strategies. So yeah, and when you say mixed hybrid model, right? So sometimes, as I said, right, your placement of inventory there also you
Mhm.
follow kind of mixed model, right? So this is like a funnel, if I have to talk about, right? So your forecast accuracy is much higher at a group at a product family level or a group of families.
Right.
But when it comes down to the actual SKU or actual item part number, right? That's where your forecast accuracy goes for a toss because we really don't know what exactly you're going to get out. And that's a reality of life, right? We just can't predict what is going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
So how can you predict what is the demand
Yeah.
that
And
you're
there's
going
a
to get?
taste thing, right? So like depending on the SKU, if it is
Hmm.
a very functional SKU, that's a different story. But if you take something like a car, or let's take something like even food products, the trends change and you try to see if your base ingredients, or let's say in the case of cars, like the chassis, some of the parts, tires, that's why all these companies have like common platforms and all that. And then there's a little bit of the overall shell on the top and the colors, those are the customizations. So they think about it that way. So they are actually able to leverage, get operating leverage on making the parts or even managing inventory with the common things. And the things which are more custom, as a customer taste change, they're able to adapt without getting a big hit to their overall financial costs they incur to manage the business. And
Right,
one more
right.
thing on the inventory piece Satya was talking about, you want to think about inventory management will apply differently for different kinds of supply chain. I think we covered one time about process manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing, discrete auto manufacturing, or you're talking about like a distribution slash retail supply chain, right? So inventory management in the setting of a manufacturing, process manufacturing, a semiconductor manufacturing, you have to balance between capacity and inventory, because in a way inventory and the capacity you have at the plan are two levers you have to provide the best service, right? In a retail setting, you don't have that. The only thing you have is inventory. So the dimension becomes unidimension, and then you act differently. So then the tactics of buy, build to order, build to forecast don't apply as much for inventory over there, but it's more about push pull strategies. Whether you want to buy everything in your local distribution center, or you want to have like a central warehouse where you keep all the inventory, or you push it to the regional distribution. So depending on how much demand pooling and good demand you have, sometimes you keep it centrally, and then as the pull comes, the order, you actually ship it. And the rest of the places you do a push pull sort of a hybrid model in the retail setting as well, but that's only in the dimension of inventory. But in the case of manufacturing, you have to overlay dimension of capacity and inventory together. They go hand in hand as balancing act to get the best service.
Oh yes, definitely. Like, at the end, you have to look into all your constraints, right? And how that is a separate discussion. I'm sure we can have a different session for that. How your
Right.
capacity constraints come into the place, the way you have to manage your inventories. That is
Inventory.
something
Right.
we can discuss, and the key concepts. But however, yeah, on a similar note, right? If I have to talk about how basically you place your inventory, where exactly, which particular level you place your inventory is also another very key piece of your inventory planning. So, and as I said, right, as and when the inventory keeps moving from raw material to ultimately the final product, you are adding value, right? So the cost of the price keeps moving, right? And the closer a product is to the final SKU or end product, that means your cost keeps going up. Now now and of course, yeah, I mean, if you build everything to the SKU level, it's good because you can just cater to the customer requirement without too much increase in light, or you can just meet the demand just in time, right? But again, what happens is that you are taking so much, the company is taking so much of risk
Yeah.
in putting that inventory at that end SKU level, because if it doesn't materialize or if demand keeps changing from one product to
Correct.
another product, that is the cost that a company has to take. It is basically indirectly taking that risk of, in case whatever the forecast bias or forecast error comes into the
Right.
place, right? That's a risk that this company. So what happens because of this, as I said, right, your forecast accuracy is higher up level at product or family group level and keeps decreasing as and when you come to the SKU level. So what company looks for is the commonality, right? So from
Right.
my product family to the SKU level, what is a commonality? And that's where they try to place the inventories. For example, I have got 100 units of demand. I don't want to put 100 units everything at SKU level. What I can do is 40% or 50%, I can come to one level below, which can decrease my lead time of, let's say,
Right.
2 weeks or whatever it is, bring it by 50%. I can park 50% of the inventory where I have that luxury. Okay, I don't have to build it to the end SKU, but let's say even if there is a demand variation between the SKUs, I can still use that common whip to cater to the different SKUs or whatever it is, right? So that is a leverage companies or the company, that is the strategy the companies come up with to look wherein they look for this commonality, and they actually mitigate the risk in a way that which I call it as optimality, right? Where you have this leverage of reducing your lead time and as well as not parking everything at the final at the end SKU level.
And queue. So
They-
sometimes queue may go end of life, like Satya was telling,
exactly.
or like in the case of food, it'll go bad end of age, right? So you will be able
Yes,
to
right.
mitigate things like this. Yeah, that's a great point. And then like just to this, we've seen the exact same thing in like yogurt in our company. Like you make the base yogurt, the flavorings of strawberry, raspberry, all those things. You try to get that done at the end. So mostly you store inventory in like bulk sort of totes with this yogurt. So whenever you have much better understanding on the demand signal, so you keep minimal inventory on the finished good, much higher inventory on like the semi-finished good, because so you can actually react faster to any changes in customer patterns, which come into play.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right, actually. And then as I said, right, from cost point of view, if you see, right, like generally what I call it is a high value and low value, right?
Right.
Generally, high value is where you have done bulk of your value addition to a product. And if a comp and what happens that high value can be used for n number of different customers. What happens is the packaging changes. Now,
Right.
when you build to the packaging level, right, it's like you are basically telling that this SKU can go only to the customer. That is amount of risk the company is taking in case the forecast doesn't materialize. So you can just keep it at a high value level.
Yeah.
And as and when you know that the lead time doesn't take, and it's and you also look, you know that what are my lead times, how quickly I can react.
Yeah.
And if the lead time is, let's say it's less, it's within a week, you can react quickly and you can just convert that high value to a specific SKU. So that's how I think staging of inventory depends on so many factors. As I said, one thing is lead time, because what is the amount of lead time you are reducing, that is one key thing. And also, as I said, right, your accuracy is higher at a higher level than to the end product level, right? So the companies will take, and it's like a mix of things. Let's say if I have to carry inventory, I'll park something one level above and 50% one level below, just to make sure that I'm, pretty much at a high level, I'm covered to meet the industry standards of lead time standards. And so that it doesn't also pile up your inventory, and you're also not at the risk of have ending up in either stock out situation, or also having in excess inventory, right?
It's a great
Because
point, Satya. I think the industry piece is also key. So, like the risk
yes,
you're
yes.
talking about. So, for example, we talked in the last few episodes, like in food business, the same Kellogg's cornflakes has been there for 40, 50 years, right? So, in situation like that, you can make the end product. You don't feel like you have too much of risk, a little bit of risk on the aging, but normally product life is not going. So, like you are okay, right? Like in a high tech industry like yours, like you have to be a lot more careful with getting to the end SKU, and you try to do the mix a little bit upstream versus making the final SKU. So that kind of thing is also important, like based on the SKU, cost, price, ingredients, stability of the industry, how fast the customer tastes are changing. All those things come into play. So again, going back to the point, having a good sense of what is the mode of operation for the business, how fast things are changing, products are changing, customers are changing, is an important pulse to have to really provide some good insight into supply chain. Because oftentimes I've seen like some people working in other industry comes to like a certain industry, they try to have quick suggestions, but if you don't really know like what are the nuances, we sometimes may end up creating too much inventory or too little inventory and create more problems. So it's a very context based thing. It's not like I can copy paste and apply it. You have to use and think a little bit of judgment whether it applies at the same level in each context or not, right?
Oh yes, yes, definitely, right. And also, as I said, right, a forecast error, forecast bias can make a lot of difference to the company gross margins, right? Like if you are building way too much, or if you have too much of forecast error, right? And it can happen because of, as I said, like you talk about trend, something, and trend is something, it's very difficult to gauge, right? And suddenly the trend changes, demand moves from one product to another product, all those things happen. Like you are in a stock out situation as well as in a situation where you have a lot of inventory excess, right? So the companies, as I said, this commonality things and how easy to convert from one product to another product, right? And if any company has that leverage, they make use of that leverage very nicely, actually. And it's a good thing to have. But if you have a fixed path of five different fixed paths, and
Yeah.
you don't have that commonality, you have to be very, very precise. When the reason I would say it's difficult to be precise, but you need to have, based on the kind of products, how many competitors you have. And that's why I say industry standard is a very critical thing, because if you have monopoly or if you have one or two leaders, and those trends are very important, the standards are very important, because at the same time you have to be making a fine balance between your cost, operating cost, and your service levels, right? When I say less a service
Yeah.
level, what is the percentage that you want to keep meeting demand on time for your customers, right? And other key thing that I'm important is for inventory management is your locations, right? Like I might be producing everything, let's say from Asia, but my customers are in USA or whatever it is, right? Now you have this fulfillment centers, and then you have this local distribution centers. Like now when you park this inventory, right, depending upon your location, and you also need to include your transit time, right, shipment time or logistics time, even that is part of your lead time. And if it is very high, and the closer you try to park your inventory to the customer, again, as I said, right, you're basically trying to park your inventory as close to the final SKU. And again, that's a risk or the company would be taking in case the forecast doesn't materialize. But again, here the catch is, even let's say you cannot be reacting saying that, okay, when the customer orders, that's when I'll ship it, because your lead time might be high. And we know that post COVID, especially from logistics, the kind of challenges we have been seeing, the logistics cost has gone up. All these things do come into the
Come into
place
play.
where you have to make sure that you are meeting the lot side of a container, right? When you're
Right.
shipping via ocean, via air and all,
Right.
and you
Exactly.
have your manufacturing setups, your where your customers are placed and all, even those lead times comes into the
Come
place.
into play. Yeah.
Yes,
And
right.
also you
And
could do that inventory placement separate for your regular demand, inventory for your demand and safety stock too. I've seen instances where you'll keep your cycle stock in all 3 or 4 locations, but safety stock you may keep at one central location. That can happen. And then the other variables which probably provide a trade-off is like, are there going to be any kind of import export controls, paperwork, and all
oh
those
yes,
things when you're actually moving between countries, because certain expensive, high expensive, like high tech products, I mean the volume is not that big, I mean like the size is not that big, so logistics cost is not that high, but sometimes this import export taxes and the charges are quite heavy. So then you
true.
take a different sort of a approach versus other places. So I I think Satya, I want to just take it to another like a basic case study we were like told several years back, like 10, 15 years. I think Dell is a classic example, like a Dell PC computers back in 90s. Uh, I'm just trying to bring the business model, how they exploited certain concepts around supply chain to bring efficiencies. Is instead of they stocking all the PCs, what they did is they have like a phone or an internet way of ordering things, where you have like 50 different customizations you could do for your PC, like a RAM, memory, processor. But they would store all the inventory at a part level. And once an order is been placed, only then they actually assemble the laptop and they ship it to you. So that's a classic example of a push versus pull. So they're forecasting at the part level, but the pull is happening only at the end SKU level. So they will only build the end SKU after an order is placed. And a consumer is happy to wait like 2, 3 days because they are actually keeping all the parts handy. They don't take too much of time, so you're able to provide higher customizations, like instead of 10 SKUs you can do 50 SKUs, but at the same time you are able to do build to order for the customers. So that was a big differentiation, so they're able to get high turns and they're able to get more customers in the funnel because they said, hey, the value proposition is we can give more customizations. So it's a win for customer, win for you from a dollar point of view. And then net that been a very successful story for Dell, like at least on their consumer business. Just as an example, I'm giving you how some of these cost efficiencies, operating leverage, inventory concepts can be some of the key parts of even creating a new business model. um, and I think, Satya, if you're okay, we can step into some of the more recent examples where you can give a brief on like capacity utilization, how it affects costs, operating leverage, asset utilization, and then we can pivot it to more like last 10 years real life examples on how some of these uh, basic thought process around utilizing your assets better will come into play in the new businesses which are formed.
Yes, definitely. Like I won't take much time. Like in a high tech industries, right? The capacities. When I say capacities, the machines and all, these are very niche machines, right? And these are very high, extremely expensive machines, right? Now, keeping them idle is not a great thing. So definitely you have to go for some minimum utilization, right? That's a key concept. Especially when you are subcontracting it to vendors, uh, you get into an agreement where you have to meet some minimum utilization. That's a key thing because that decides the operating cost, the amount of gross margins, right? And and let's say, and when I say that the capacity utilization is also plays a very important role for your inventory management, because let's say a particular line is constrained. You have bottlenecks, and I'm sure we read a lot
Yeah.
about this, about bottlenecks when we were doing our industrial engineering, how bottlenecks play a key role in your inventory management. One of the key things is that we know that it is going to take a lot of time for us to, let's say, add that capacity and all. Capacity utilization, I know that it's another big topic that I'm sure we'll cover in another session, but quick thing here is that uh, let's say we know that we would have not predicted, or it takes a lot of time for us to add additional capacity and all, but how is that you're going to manage inventories uh, for those products where you have this capacity constraints. Now you have to build more inventories, because when the capacity is constrained, the wait time goes up, and the wait time goes up, your lead time goes up, and that means it impacts your service levels, customer satisfaction, right? So in that case also, what we do, or what I call it, is you start building ahead, right? So
Yeah,
what
so
you
you
try
may
to
have a
do.
season where you're bottlenecked a couple of months, but
Exactly.
not all months in the year are constrained. So the other month
Exactly.
you build
you
inventory.
go f- you
Yeah,
go for linearized loading to make sure that you keep feeding those machines,
right.
so that you don't, when the demand comes, those don't constrain. And these buffers play a very important role, right? These buffers definitely come, and that's why I call it as inventory buffers, capacity buffers, right? These are very key important strategies for a company, because that's more of a proactive way of dealing with your forecast bias or forecast errors. But these also comes with some sort of cost if it goes the other way. But again, this is where stable companies, or if you are pretty much aware of the product, the kind of relationship you have with your customers,
Right.
all these things comes into the place. And definitely these are the levers the companies go for, and while planning for inventory. Yeah, that's what I want to say about how
Yeah, great. I
capacity.
mean, just to take that Satya's example on capacity utilization and building ahead of time for inventory and using, right? I mean, we have seen some of the, this applies in your day-to-day life as well. I mean, if you think about your own personal finances, like the biggest item we have on like our expense sheet or assets point of view, you have a house, and then the next one is a car, right? And if you think about your house, uh, this applies a lot more in the US, especially the single family homes here. They are reasonably big, and you have a bunch of rooms which are not utilized as much, right? But the price of like a 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom is not that much different. So you normally have a 4 bedroom, you have it, and you are not using it. Or let's say you had kids at a point in time, you had a 4 bedroom, kids now went to college, you have two rooms which are like not being used at all, right? So your asset, you're living in it, you're paying your mortgage and all that, but it's not being used as much. That's where the concept of how do you use a capacity better came into play with Airbnb. With Airbnb, you could do a location type of setting with a smartphone application, and you can actually check in. You can do all these things. Probably it was not feasible until 2008, 2010, before a smartphone was not. So what I was telling was about the Airbnb business, where individuals who have like bigger homes and they're not fully utilizing their asset in a way, right? It's like a, in a sense, like a plant cranking out products. This is like a house where you have utilization of having a resident staying there, sleeping and all that. Now with the Airbnb, you're able to rent out your incremental rooms which are not being used, and you're able to improve your utilization of the asset. So that's a win-win for the customers and also a host, because you have some house available. See, this comes into play really well, especially let's take an example like of a football game happening in like US, right? Like recently we had Super Bowl football happening in Phoenix. So Phoenix will have certain number of hotels and people will go stay there and then do all the stuff, but they are not utilized like all the time, right? So Satya, are you with me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I think, I don't know, something
Okay.
got stuck.
No, I was talking about like the house, how the asset utilization of the your personal home is quite low if your rooms are empty.
Right.
And then with Airbnb, you're able to rent out the rooms and get good utilization, and you're getting some money, and it's a win-win. But I'm just going to give the example of the point you're talking about surge demand, like demand is increasing. How do you manage asset utilization point of view on a globe and a more macro sense? If you think about it, let's say a city is hosting a cricket game or a football game, right? You'll have certain set number of hotels. People will come in, they stay there, they're going to actually watch the game. But it's a one-time thing. It doesn't happen every day. So the hotel guys are not going to build like all the rooms and keep them empty, right? So they want to just stay there. But if you take like in the city, there are a bunch of these homes. They may have these empty rooms, and at a certain price they may be willing to rent out the room because there is a Super Bowl game happening in Phoenix. People are going there for that weekend. There is a surge pricing because everybody has to be sitting there, they have to stay overnight, whatever it might be, right? So you are able to get this higher asset utilization of the homes around that, and providing a solution for like demand supply mismatch which exists there. It's the same example you can see in Uber as well. If you take like a normal taxi, they would have probably opened up or bought so many taxis, and taxi guys are doing business for a normal day to day, right? But when there is a big surge, let's say there is a graduation, there's a convention, there's a cricket game, I don't think the taxi guys, like there are so many extra taxis to do it because it's a one time thing. You're not going to have for that surge thing, peak load, right? But because of Uber, a normal car can become like a taxi for that weekend. And essentially, it's meeting the surge demand, and then it's helping the demand supply mismatch which existed. This is a tremendous situation we were able to see because of smartphones and certain new technologies. You are able to actually, with location identification and other things, you're able to enable this. But this supply demand problem existed for decades. This is not a new thing, right? I'm just giving an example where certain other things happening in technology and evolution of our society, some enablers will come into play and which will solve the supply demand thing. But the basic concepts of capacity utilization, inventory, supply demand applies everywhere in the world, in your personal life, in business, and
True,
everywhere, you know?
true. And that's why they call supply chain as a more of a common sense. It's more of a common sense thing. And adding, bringing to the point what you said, right? No one is going to build a house, or no one is going to add a transportation fleet just because you have surge in
Yeah,
demand. The same thing, right? When we talk about bigger companies, and the another piece they do is, subcontracting
right.
your production, right? Even that's a very good lever, they make use of it. And let's say there's a surge in demand and all, you can say that, okay. And a smart way of qualifying the new products, right, at the new vendor or new site. And that is something you are subcontracting, so that is another lever the companies make use of it, which I call it as a buffers, right? So the capacity buffers, it can be your in-house, or it can be something that
Outside.
you have,
Yeah,
subcontracted. All these things do come into the place. And as I said, right, everything has its own pros and cons. It's like optimal decision the companies takes.
right.
Basically, what is the advantages you have, what is the disadvantages you have, all these things, and they come to a common conclusion, going with a mix of all the things, making sure that they are at least meeting their bare minimum margin, gross
Right. Yeah.
margins, how they are being financed, and all those
Yeah.
macro
Yeah.
decisions come
So
into the
those
place.
like third party contracting vendors, probably they do like sort of level loading kind of thing in a way, because they have two or three other companies who want to use 20% utilization on their line. Essentially, that's how the business model is built on, and
Yes,
that's what they try
right.
to.
Basically, yeah, the kind of also that some amount of also risk you are passing on to them, where you are
Yeah.
basically both the parties are, taking that shock of, or basically they are able to absorb the risk, whatever it is. And of course, with the risk, you also basically your margins, or you
Yeah.
might have to pay slightly higher, but then that's what it is. It's like a win-win
You're
situation,
right.
as you
Yeah.
mentioned, right? So yeah.
This kind of thing, I think the other another example I wanted to provide was like the cloud computing thing which came into play, right? I mean, of course, there is an aspect of technology which is not existed before, or we are not able to do it before. I don't know the technical details, but simple example, all the enterprises had their own data centers, and that's what they've been using to do run the application databases, whatever we used to do our supply chain and everybody's day-to-day job, HR, finance, everything, right? And then now here comes like the concept where you'll have, instead of having like one data center, you'll have like this massive data center somewhere in the country where the power is low, less expensive, cooling is less expensive, and the land is less expensive. And then you are able to transport this capability of storing like in a database or computing things or having your applications run through the internet pipes, and you can send it through anywhere in the country, right? This is a classic we are very much used to this in supply chain, right? You have a local regional distribution center or like one massive gigantic one, and you do like a optimization based on what is the cost of transportation and storage and the service level you want to provide. Same thing happened, like all these bunch of companies have their own data centers, but especially retail guys, but the peak loads happen only in like December, November, like in US during the holiday season. Rest of the time your data center is at 50% utilization. So the cost of the servers, networking equipment, everything, you're paying 20% asset which is not used. Whether you use it or not, after 4 5 years they'll die. You have to replace them. Instead of that, you can take some portion of your workload and put it in the cloud. So you're able to actually get that flexibility, like what Satya was saying. In a way, it's exactly the external partner concept, right? And then you have your own like plant, which is your data center. You're running things. The only difference is this external supply chain partners concept in the cloud that has become really massive, massive thing, which is like AWS and Microsoft Azure and Google GCP and all. And there are other probably nuances which come into play. The reason for they becoming bigger, because it's all connected, they're able to get feedback from multiple customers, and they're having much faster product life cycles in software and platforms and things. But again, like I think I was reading Jeff Bezos 2014 or I cannot recollect 14 or 15, like shareholder letter, he clearly writes. I think that's where it clicked for me that AWS was a huge capacity problem. These guys were able to identify. I'm sure there are other angles on a software side, but from like a cost point of view, it's a gigantic capacity utilization problem. They took it and they scaled it into like a big data center for the world. Now Amazon, Microsoft, they have data centers serving the whole globe instead of 2000, ten
True.
thousand companies having their individual data centers. They are able to send it through internet pipes and then make a good efficiency out of it. So it's a win-win for the customer in AWS and Azure. So
True. True.
sometimes we don't know how these things come into picture, like it clicks through, but this is like age-old concepts being applied in a new way, and new business models are being built on that.
Yes, those only the thing is the terminals are changing. That's the only difference, but the pretty
Yeah,
much the base business model remains the same.
exactly. Yeah,
All right, Uday, I think it was a great conversation, especially the analysis that you brought in. I think people would be, they can relate to this analysis because
yeah,
everything ends up, how we basically use it in a day-to-day life. And that's what supply chain is all about.
right, right. That's a
All,
good note to end, Satya. Thank you. We'll
all
meet in
right,
the next week's
sure.
episode.